Hi guys, Samantha from Jessama Tutorials here, and today is day 12 of the Cracklathon, where I'm doing a crackle veneer for every day of the month. So today we are going to be doing a heat gun crackle, and we're going to be using a pre-existing veneer that I have. This is a faux red tiger eye veneer that I made a while back, and I will provide a link to that tutorial in the links below. But we're going to be learning how to take a veneer, crackle it, and then we're also going to then bake that and then fill it in. So that is the crackle that we are going to be exploring today. So any pre-existing veneer will work. So first thing we want to do is we want to take any veneer, and if it is under 2mm thick, you want to take that and you want to put that on a piece of backing clay. So I've got a piece of black here that was rolled out to 2mm thick, and I'm going to press that down onto it, because when you are heat gunning clay, you are essentially curing it, and when clay is in the when clay is cured but not cured long enough, so it hasn't been in the oven for say an hour or so at the right temperature, it becomes extremely brittle, and that can be used to your advantage to create some interesting effects. But you also have to keep in mind that it means that your clay will be quite brittle, so if it is too thin, you will just end up with a bunch of crumbs. So just make sure that you have your clay thick enough before you start this technique. Okay, and any clay that you are not going to use, trim away, because we don't want to waste any clay, because once it has been semi-cured with a heat gun, you essentially can't use it again for the most part. Then take a piece of paper and burnish this down so that we have no air bubbles. And if you can feel any air bubbles while you're doing this, I can definitely feel one somewhere around here. There we are. I'm going to slice that and try and get that air bubble out. It might actually be even under the veneer. Okay, there we go. And then we'll just carry on burnishing, and that will smooth out that slice that we had. There we are. Because you want it to be completely flat, because when you're filling in the crackle later on, once it has been baked, you don't want any texture to the surface other than the crackle, because otherwise that will get highlighted. Okay, now I just want to move you over. There we are, so you can see what I am doing. Now we are going to take our heat gun, and before we do that, actually I want to grab our cutter that we are going to be using, because I'm going to be making a coaster, and I'm going to be using my Maxi soft squares, and I'm going to be using the second largest one. Okay, so I just want to make a slight imprint of whereabouts I want to trim, and then I'm just going to trim a little bit around it, because again, I don't really want too much excess clay after we're finished here, because I can't actually use this clay for much, so most of it I want it to be used in the project. Then grab your heat gun, and you can't use a hairdryer for this, it won't replace your heat gun, it needs to be a heat gun. This is the brand that I'm using, pretty much any brand will work. Try to get an industrial grade one, but the scrapbooking ones will work as well. And then set it onto your hottest setting and your highest wind speed. Okay, and now what you're looking for, when you're looking to the side here, if you ever look at the clay, it has a slightly glossy finish because it is raw. When you're using the heat gun, you will find that that gloss will go away. That is what you're looking for. Also, when you're using a heat gun, I find that it's good to leave it for about 5 seconds on before you bring it near the clay, just so that it warms up. And I don't want to go any further. That is enough to cure the surface of the clay, since we let it warm up for a bit. And the last thing you want to do is you want to cure it too much. That's the last thing you want to do. Always under cure it, and then if you need to cure it some more, do that. So I can feel that's cured all over. There's no resistance, and then you just want to press your finger in, and if there is some slight give underneath, that's good. If there's too much give, then you can always go back and crackle it, but that is basically the amount that I like to do. And now again, this is also a technique that requires practice. If you have never done it before, I recommend starting out with some really yucky leftover clay that you really don't know what to do with, and practice on that. That's what I did in the beginning. It took me about 5 tries before I came out with something that I actually liked. Okay, so now I'm just gonna gently persuade it to crackle. There we go. And I like to start cracking it by hand. And that what I made actually, that length of time that I spent on the clay with the heat gun, that is about the maximum that I would spend. You can see it, the cracks are fairly large. If you want them smaller, spend less time with the heat gun. And you can see it crackles really, really quickly. And the last thing you want to do is overdo it, because then you can't really get very nice cracks. You just end up with brittle clay that doesn't really look great. But I do like large cracks for this technique, because I like the original veneer to shine through, so I don't like really fine cracks. Okay, and I will crackle it by hand. I do not put it through a pasta machine for this technique, and I don't like to stretch it a huge amount for this technique either. You can stretch it a little bit, but don't go overboard. It's better to just kind of pick it up and start manipulating it with your hands to get those cracks. But basically when you put it all down, they should all kind of fit together somewhat without you being able to see them for the most part. That is what I find creates the best effect as far as this technique goes, because we want our filled in lines to be subtle. If you want them to not be subtle, then give it a stretch, but I would like them to be subtle because I like this tiger eye veneer and I want it to be the centerpiece. Okay, and I'm almost done crackling this. Just going over, making sure that I got everywhere that I want. Okay, and I think that's good. Right, then if I place that back down and press on it a little bit, you'll see that they basically slot together pretty much. And I like that. So then I'm going to flip it onto its back, and what I want to do is I want to give it a very slight texture with some sandpaper. And now don't press too hard, because the clay that we have as a base here is quite soft. That will squish through the cracks if you press really hard. So using a texture that you have to roll over or press really hard on is probably not the best idea. Try something like sandpaper, where you just kind of press it a little bit and you get a nice texture. And this is also why I don't want to roll it through the pasta machine, because you will end up flattening those cracks. You'll end up with a nice effect, but you will not be able to do the fill-in effect that I'm going to be showing you after this is baked. This back clay is quite sticky. Anyway, okay, so I've got a pretty good texture along the back there. The front is still looking pretty good. Now we are going to take our cutter, and I always cut from the back. Now the reason you do this, and I know that I'm talking on a bit, but I really want to give you guys as many tips as possible. If you cut with the cured side facing up, what you will find is that it will start to press down and it will actually bevel the edges slightly, and you'll find that the crackle will crumble along the edges. Whereas if you do it from this side, what you will find is that you will get a nice flat surface on the front, and I will demonstrate that now. Okay, press down and make sure you press nice and hard. And the reason for this is because you're working with semi-cured clay, and that does not cut as easily as raw clay. Okay, and you can see we get a really nice clean effect. We will need to gently smooth along these sides, just a touch, to remove excess, but for the most part you get a really nice cut. Now I want to just show you what would happen if you cut it from the top. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of press this together to give us a little bit more to work with. There we are. So I'm going to press from the top. Then you can see it's slightly beveled, and hopefully you can see that it's taken that was sitting like that before, and it actually went and it's pulled it down. So it just doesn't create as nice an effect as if you cut it from this side. So you can see there, that cut versus that cut. So hopefully that's enough to demonstrate that. Okay, so now I will take that piece that I just made, put it on a piece of plain printing paper like so, and if you want you can just grab a blade and just gently smooth along the edges here. That's all I like to do. I'm not cutting or anything, I'm just using it to stroke the edges, which will remove a lot of excess clay if there is any. And then I'll just give it a brush to remove the last of it. And then I will put this in the oven for a full hour at Primo's recommended temperature, and then we will move on to the filling in as soon as it is cooled. Okay, and here it is out of the oven. So you can see it looks really nice. Okay, so now I just want to give the sides a quick sand. Just grab some coarse sandpaper. I think this is 180 grit. And you can sand underwater. I'm just going to put a little bit of water on here because I don't want to dry sand without a mask. I generally sand underwater if I'm using wet dry sandpaper. So I'll just quickly wet this. Okay. And then I'm just going to take this, and it's a very quick sand. I'm just going to brush it along the edges like so, and that will just smooth out. So you can see here it's smoothed it out quite a bit compared to over here where it's a bit more rough. Hopefully you can see that. There we go, and that's all the sanding I think we need to do. Then I'm just going to quickly clean up all of that water. Okay, and now it's important before you do anything else that you make sure that this is completely dry. So we don't want water on here when we are filling it in with clay, because that can just cause issues. So just go and dry up all that water. Okay, and we're going to tidy up the sides a little bit more later on, but for the moment we just needed to give it a quick sand. Next, grab some white polymer clay. At least that is the colour that I want to use. Use any colour you want. And this is a good place for you to actually use Sculpey white, Sculpey 3 white, if you have any Sculpey 3. Preferably use a different brand, but if you have Sculpey 3 that you feel like you need to use up, this is a good place to use it in filling in stuff. But I've got some Primo white for this technique. So you want it nice and warm, squish it in, and then just drag it across your project. And you want to press really hard. Now, some of you might have trouble with this because it does require a bit of pressure, and if you do have arthritis in your hands or they're sore for some reason, this can be quite painful. So if you're having trouble with that, it's always better to use the polymer clay if you can, because I just find that it's easier in the long run. But if you're having trouble with that, you can also replace the polymer clay with white liquid clay. So if you happen to have any white liquid clay, you can replace it, but then you're going to need to maybe fill it in a few times, not just once. So you might have to do multiple bakings because the liquid clay shrinks a little bit. And also you will want to bake your clay again for maybe about 5 minutes after you have sanded it with that wet dry sandpaper, because any water will make your liquid clay bubble, whereas if you're using polymer clay like this, a little bit of water is not going to cause a huge amount of damage. Okay, And so you'll just continue smoothing along the entire surface, and when I am done, I'll show you how to clean it up. Okay, and here it is. Now we're done. Now what I want to do is grab a tissue blade. Make sure it's nice and clean before you do this, because you don't want to contaminate your white. And you want to be very gentle with this. You want to just slice across the surface, just to remove that top layer of white. Don't press too hard, because you don't want to slice your baked clay. You just want to be scraping off the top. Okay, and generally once you get to this point, you have to move on to a different method, because any more will end up slicing your clay. So what I like to do is I like to grab a cloth. So I'll bring that over here. And I've got this rough cloth. You want one with lots of bristles like this. Grab it and then almost sand your clay. And hopefully you can see there that will start to remove it. It takes a bit of patience, but hopefully you can see that starting to remove it. If you happen to have isopropyl alcohol, it will go a lot faster, but you don't need the isopropyl alcohol. But if you do have any, it makes the process go much quicker, as you can see. And it doesn't do any harm to the clay to spray it once or twice with the isopropyl alcohol to get it to kind of dissolve a bit. There we are. And we are almost done. Just a touch more to go. And this is going to look really nice. And I do want to put a coat of resin over this as well. Okay, and now your veneer generally is not going to be completely flat when you bake it, especially since we've done the crackle. So you will need to go in and make sure that you get some of those areas where the clay is not completely flat, because you will find that that can be a little harder to remove. Okay, there we are. Just go over and make sure I got all of the areas. And I have got one spot over here where we had a nick in the clay. I don't really want that to be highlighted, so I'll just grab my blade and I'll just gently scrape in that area to remove that white clay. And that is why I was saying before that you want to try and get your veneer as flat as physically possible, because otherwise you will end up with a lot of highlighted bumps. Okay, and just go over and make sure that you've got nice, sharp, crisp lines. Okay, and then I'll also just quickly clean up the sides here. Like so. Okay, and there's what it looks like. Really nice. Okay, and the next step is going to take some black liquid clay. You can use my Jessama smear technique as well. I will provide a link to that. But for a lot of you, you've said that you have a lot of trouble with that. So here is the alternative technique if you happen to have liquid clay. I recommend black liquid Sculpey liquid clay instead of the Kato that I used to use, because it has a matte finish and it also is not as runny. So I don't have nearly as much trouble with it as I used to with the Kato. And you'll just take it and you'll just rub it along the edges here. And what that will do is it will give you a nice uniform colour. It will get rid of any scratches or bumps, so long as the bumps aren't super large. That's why we did a quick sand beforehand. Because the liquid clay is not going to completely cover that. It's going to cover minor bumps and scratches that you would need to go through some fine sanding to remove. Okay, and you can see it's fairly quick, fairly easy, and you really want a light layer. Don't dump it on. You want a very small layer, and this is why I'm saying if you've got some major bumps, make sure that you do give it a sand beforehand. because that will cause issues later on. Okay, and this is the last side, and then I want to show you one last step before we put it in the oven for our final bake. And then after that we will want to give it a very fine sand on the front before we put a layer of resin on. Okay, now you can see that we have got some liquid clay around here. So just grab something to wipe that off. You can use your finger, that will work as well. Just go around and remove any liquid clay that might have spilled over onto the surface. Okay, there we go. And now I will put that in the oven for a full hour at Primo's recommended temperature. Okay, and here it is baked. So now that it has cooled off, I'm just going to give it a minor sand with some 400 grit polishing papers, and all that's going to do is it's just going to take some mica particles that are kind of floating around, not really doing anything other than kind of messing up the image, and it's just going to sand them off. So it's just going to clean up any issues we might have. And I'm not going to go any higher than a 400. 400 is plenty. It's just to clean up anything. Okay, then I'm just going to take a stiff brush and I'm going to just work out any dust that I might have got into here. Okay, there we go. And you can see the sides are nice and clean. So now we're going to apply some resin. So I'm just going to bring over a resin mat. And I'm going to be using Tiny Pandora's Deep Shine. I usually use Magic Gloss. Tiny Pandora also sells that. But I'm going to be using the Magic Gloss today because I don't need to create such a high dome. Which is quite important because if we're going to be using this as a coaster, we don't want a huge dome on it. We want a fairly flat resin finish. I'm just going to pour some on. You don't need too much. And I'm going to brush it around with my skewer to start with. And this does not pull back anywhere near as much as Lisa Bervelka's Magic Gloss, and that's because you don't need to create a dome with it. So picking the UV resin that you want for the project that you have is quite important. If you want a nice high dome, I would recommend Lisa Bervelka's Magic Gloss. If you want a flatter finish, but you do still want it to have this beautiful glass-like resin finish, Magic Gloss is Deep Shine is a really nice way to go. Okay, and I prefer to use a skewer rather than a brush, just because it can be a little tricky sometimes to keep that brush clean after it's had the UV resin on it. And also, if you have the UV resin on it, you generally have to wrap it up in tin foil, and it's just a bit more work than if I just use a skewer. Okay, and I like to just gently brush it around, and by doing this generally I end up getting rid of pretty much all the air bubbles. And then if I need to, I will add some more resin. But I think we've got just about enough to create our first coat. But you do want to give this a moment or two because of the air bubbles. Those don't pop under the UV lamp, they cure. So you want to make sure that you get rid of that. I want to show you a quick trick for getting rid of those if you've got a flat resin finish. Doesn't work so well with domed resin finishes. With flat resin, it works really well. So there we are. Once I've spaced it all around, grab a hairdryer or a heat gun, put it on your lowest heat setting and your highest wind speed, and blow over the surface. find that gets rid of a lot of air bubbles. Okay, and any that are left, I find that air bubbles in this resin are quite a bit more stubborn than some of the other UV resins that I've used. So any others that are left, I will simply go and scoop out. There we are. And if I move that around, hopefully you can see that there's not really much of a dome on there, but it does have a nice flat resin effect. So now I'm going to put that in the UV lamp for roughly around 15 minutes, just to make sure that it is cured properly. And then I'll show you how it looks when we are done. Okay, and here is the coaster. You can see it's got a nice resin finish. So that is basically it for this tutorial. It's a really fun technique. It's a little bit of a more complicated process due to the fact that you have to bake the crackle before you can highlight it. Again, keep in mind you do not have to use polymer clay to highlight it. You can use liquid clay, and if you don't have any liquid clay, paint will also work. It's not quite as nice as using polymer clay or liquid clay, but it will get the job done. So keep in mind that you can do that if you can't manage the polymer clay or don't have liquid clay. And if you would like to vote for your favourite crackle, as we are doing a total of, I do believe, about 31 crackles this month, if you would like to vote for your favourite one, please do check out my group Jessama Tutorials Polymer Clay Community on Facebook. I will have a link to that in the description below. We are going to have a vote for the most popular crackle, and then next month I will be doing a project on it, so be sure to check that out. And as always, I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.